Welcome. This is Chris Donnelly here, who's a director for the Institute for Statecraft. So, Chris, tell us a little bit more about the Institute for Statecraft and what is it that it actually does?
Well, if you think about it, statecraft is how a state is run, and the skill and the competence with which the leadership run the country. And what we noticed, my colleagues and I, having spent all our lives in government, is that the speed of change in the world is hotting up. The world's getting faster and faster, whether you measure it by politics, economics, technology, or whatever.
And what was your role? You alluded to working in the government. So previously, have you done any sort of work with the government? Or
I was in the Ministry of Defence. My job for 20 years was studying conflict and war and teaching it at the Military Academy. And then for 13 years I was the Secretary General's advisor in NATO headquarters in Brussels, and my job was to manage the problems after the end of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War, to help the transformation of communist countries into democracies.
Right, okay, so I mean that in itself is a tall order, because democracy, communism, or any sort of ism with regards to politics is a state of mind in itself, and what's happening within that country. So I'm assuming it was an uphill battle.
It's always an uphill battle, and it's still an uphill battle, because it's not just a state of mind, it's also the mechanisms that you build to run the country, the ministries, the organisations. And as the world speeds up, those organisations get overtaken. They can't adapt quickly enough to stay fit for purpose. So governments become more and more impotent, and a gap opens up between what the states can do and what people need.
So I'm assuming the role of NATO and its engagement with the general public is part and parcel of that state of mind, and helping people to understand the mechanisms of government and how they can change things around as well from within, rather than influences from the outside.
That is exactly what NATO is about now. If you'd gone out in the streets of Huddersfield 30 years ago and said to anybody on the street, what is NATO, they could have told you instantly. It's the organisation which organises Western countries to protect them against the Soviet Union. Simple as that.
And do you feel that
But that's all changed, and NATO didn't change for a long time. It also became obsolescent. It also lost its sense of purpose.
Do you feel the recent comments of Donald Trump with regards to 4% of GDR of each country to commit to NATO defence has kind of refocused the alliance more, or brought it to the front of people's minds about NATO? I mean, people of an older generation like myself will understand what NATO is, but a lot of younger people will probably not be aware of NATO or not have the familiarity with NATO, because the Soviet Union's threat diminished over certainly a period of time, and now it seems to be raising itself in a different way, of course, through possibly cyber attacks or various other ways. Do you think that there is a bigger awareness now with regards to NATO's role, especially in a response to the Soviet Union?
No, I don't. I think that's the problem. I don't think people have even heard of it, let alone know what it's done. But what's changed is, firstly, you no longer have two big blocks of states facing one another in a confrontation. Russia is re-emerged as a problem, but it's not the same as it was in Soviet times. It's no longer cut and dry. Secondly, it's not the only show in town. You've got China. You've got all over the world now. It's become truly multipolar. The US doesn't call the shots everywhere anymore. It's become, in a sense, more balanced, but it's also become more unstable.
And do you feel, I mean, previously the US had a lead role within NATO, certainly from a financial point of view as well, as the biggest sort of contributor and the leader, and having the vetoes within NATO, just like the United Kingdom having a veto as well. Do you feel that the US has changed its focus considerably over a period of time as well, not just in its current sort of presidential element, but in the past couple of presidents as well?
Firstly, the US still has a lead role to play and still puts in most money. But any US president, not just Donald Trump, would have delivered that same message, because at the moment, the fact that the US provides 3/4 of the budget to NATO, whereas in fact if you look at the wealth of Europe, that's a disproportionate burden on the US. Any US president would have come to deliver the same message as Donald Trump.
But
we may have delivered it rather more politely, but it would have been the same message.
Maybe so. However, yet we would possibly perceive to be closer to the threat, although the threat has changed and is not focused on one area, as the Eastern Bloc maybe, or the previous Soviet Union, and now is multifaceted from around the world now. But we're still relatively geographically closer as Europeans. Why do you think we don't accept or take it as much as seriously as we should?
That's an interesting point. The fact is, if you look at British government spending over the last 45, 50 years, 50 years ago we used to spend a third of our national income on health, education and welfare, and today we spend 2/3 on that, leaving only 1/3 for everything else, not 1/3 to defence, but for everything. Now my children are 40 years old and they've grown up with that progression as normal, and it's not sustainable. For any country, we have to find different ways of doing things, different ways of spending money, different ways, more effective ways of protecting ourselves from modern threats which are out there. So the nature of the threats we now face has changed. There's still a strong military element to it, but everything is now a weapon. We're facing, you mentioned cyber, that's one that people are aware of, but information is a weapon, economics is a weapon, organised crime is a weapon, energy is being used as a weapon. We have to get to understand we're in a world now of really acute competition in which military is only one tool. We have to learn to play this new game of protecting ourselves, and that means A, we have to understand it, B, we have to modernise the instruments to protect us, and that's NATO, and that's what NATO wants to do, and it needs the populations of the member nations to understand what it is and support it. And thirdly, we have to act, because as governments are becoming more impotent, populations, communities have more responsibility to get up and do something and change things. If government is getting out of date, if it can't fill the gap between the state, what states know what people need, who's going to do it? And the answer is, we have to do it.
Some really interesting points there, Chris Donnelly, the director from the Institute of Statecraft. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.